Okay, and we are recording. So Richard, if you want to go ahead and talk to us, and let's get our day going here.
Yeah, Pat, can you hear me?
I can. If
Yeah,
everyone else will mute for just a minute. Go ahead, Richard.
yeah. I think the first thing is just to thank you and your team for putting this meeting together. And also to thank everybody that's on the call. If they weren't on the call, I don't. If they're on the call, it shows their interest in doing something about housing for those folks that are less fortunate in our community. Um, the mayor, back in earlier the year, identified as housing as one of the pillars that he wants to improve during his time in office. And he believes that the way to do that is to engage the people that are involved in housing, and that will provide a path on how to do that. And I'm on the call to represent him today, just to listen and to offer in his office if there's anything we can do to help with the process. He's already had one meeting earlier in the year with a group of property owners, and we're more than happy to continue with those meetings. We did get interrupted by COVID a little bit, but again, I'm on to listen, and I hope we can start a process to improve housing for all in the community.
Thank you so much, Richard. Anybody have any questions for Richard real quick? Richard's saying no. We're going to move on along and to explain a few things before we get into why we're actually here. Hey, Melanie. Again, I'm going to keep repeating this. If everyone will just please know we are recording this webinar, and that if you will please put in your name and organization in the chat box, that'll give us a digital attendance sheet. Before we get into why we're all here today, I wanted to explain, why it is that Home for Good is actually putting together this conversation, and we are literally as the representative of the continuum of care. And I'm not going to read the slides to you, but the continuum of care obviously is an organization of agencies. We just happen to be the lead of that continuum of care. On the call today, Curtis Lockett, who captained at the Marshal's office, who was our continuum of care board chair, and several other of our board members. And the continuum is the recognized entity by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, who is in charge of implementation and planning and system revitalization, transformation for those in our community who are experiencing homelessness. So we're the collaborative agent kind of thing between the clients and the agencies. So Home for Good is serving in the capacity of bringing these groups together. If everyone will mute themselves, please. We're having some background noise. Thanks. The COC board, I mentioned our chair is Curtis Lockett from the Marshal's office. We have representation from the housing authorities on both sides of the river. We have some veteran service organizations represented, school districts, private property owners, religious leaders in our community, wide variety of cross section, and to include those who have experienced homelessness in their lifetime, to give a perspective from a client point of view, serving on our board. And why we're here, we're all responding to COVID-19, but COVID-19 is just another one of the things that have happened that has made us to take a step back and say, we can't keep reacting, we have to be proactive. And being that our goal is to make sure we end homelessness in our community, you can't end homelessness without housing. Thus, why we invited everybody to come. And whether it be a property owner with one property, or a large property management firm that manages thousands of property or units, everybody needs to be part of the discussion and the solution. And from a perspective of service providers. We need to hear what works, what doesn't work, what difficulties you have. We also need to listen to the clients and see what difficulties they have, and really want everybody to be part of the planning process and the implementation, and not be afraid anywhere along the way to say, you know what, we thought we were going in the right direction and we thought this was going to work. But you know what, we're not seeing the results. How do we measure it? Are we seeing what we intended? And if not, let's take a left turn. Let's take a right turn. We may take a U-turn. Not being afraid to do that, but knowing that we have a role inside of ending homelessness in our community, and to rapidly rehouse anyone who does enter the homelessness response system. You know, it is our goal for someone, whether it be a family or individual, who enters our homeless response system, to be housed or rehoused within 30 days. Studies and all the data has proven the quicker someone turns around and gets re-enters housing and is able to maintain it, the longer term effects, benefits to them and their family and the community at large. I know everyone's is muted, but any questions thus far as to why we're sitting here virtually meeting? Cool. Moving right along. Again, if anyone's joined us in the last few minutes, if you'll just make sure you put your name and your organization in the chat box, so we'll have that, I'm sorry, the digital attendance record. And before we close today, I will go down that, just to make sure that if there's somebody on the phone that we didn't capture, that we go ahead and capture that. Now, love to say this was all the idea of you know, the continuum of care, and the board are brilliant people. And this is something we had actually talked about in our board meeting starting in January of this year. But we have been given, thanks to COVID-19 and a lot of the work that the folks at the Department of Housing and Urban Development have done, we've been given almost a roadmap on how we plan and implement things. And again, it's a roadmap, not with specific directions on how you do anything, but some guides. Some things may apply to every community, some things may not. Some things we may say, you know what, they think that's a high priority, but that's not a high priority in our community. And it's all about prioritization for our community. I see, Walisha, you raised your hand. You have a question?
You answered it.
Okay. Well, I will just keep rolling right along then if I'm doing that. So the first, there are many documents, and as we wrap up, you'll see on the back slide, on the last slide of this presentation, there is a link to all of the information I'm going over to today, and a whole lot more. Lots and lots of information, lots and lots of guides. I'm a firm believer in, you know, if someone put the work and the effort into doing it, let's maybe take a look and see if we can use that as a starting point. And I think we have a pretty good tool here to use as our starting point. But talking about how we start the communication and the planning for that. Again, those with lived experiences, those who have experienced homelessness, having a diverse group of folks in the conversation. And that, again, that diverse conversation, of course, has everything to do with the look of everybody, and making sure that we meet the needs and the different cultures in our society. But it also, again, goes back to having that landlord who may have one or two units to that property management company that manages thousands. So you need feedback from everybody in the community when it comes to this. Talking about moratoriums and this kind and those kinds of things. Excuse me. Let me grab something to drink. Hold on one second. How to engage the legal system, you know, whether it be Georgia Legal Services, Alabama Legal Services, because we do cross the border here on our continuum. So we're talking about both sides of the river, Muskogee and Russell County. How do we engage those? And so those are just the first 3 points in the planning process. And as we go further, we'll see that each one of these is going to have to be designated to, someone's going to have to be responsible for it getting done. And then how does it get done? What does that look like? So we'll as we move forward, we'll talk that a little bit. But what are the actions that you take then if you're going to start that communication process? Well, one of the things is start here in having this conversation. And how do excuse me, how do we talk to landlords about which one of our agencies, staff members are responsible for different aspects? Who do they call? How do they call them? How do, the communication and determination and those kinds of things. Of course, all that varies on if someone is paying their rent completely themselves or if they're on a program where it's based on percentages. How do we communicate? And how do we talk about what we as providers can do, how we can assist landlords, but also how landlords can assist providers? Do we start with a weekly, hey, as of right now, these are the units I have available or whatever, talking about different programs, what that looks like as far as guaranteed rent. If we say we're going to have supportive services, if we say we're going to have what we normally call case management, are we making sure that the landlord is part of that regular communication? So we're not just communicating with the client, but we're communicating with the landlord as well. And again, working with the groups of those who've been marginalized and those who were most affected by homelessness in our community. And how do we find out what has worked in the past and what hasn't? We don't need to just continue to do something because we've always done it. Because I'm going to tell you, we wouldn't be in this boat if we keep going here. We're not going to get out of the boat we're in. Things are going to continue the way they are, and we're not going to get any different results. And I venture to say that it's going to get worse if we continue to do the same thing every time because we're afraid of change. So going on to just the other key points that were pointed out. And again, if someone's just joining us, please go ahead and put your name and organization in the chat box, and we'll review everything or everybody, the attendees at the end, just make sure we haven't missed anybody. So talking about, getting you guys to the table. How do we do this? And again, we're going to send out, we've got another spreadsheet. Find that I'm really like those. But on what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and who's going to be responsible. And this is going to be a responsibility that's going to be shared amongst all of us, because every one of you is an expert in something. We all are. And making sure that we have the subject matter experts doing those things that they can do so much better than the rest of us. So having a landlord-intended engagement and education, critical. How do we teach people to be better tenants? And how do we, as service providers, help the landlords to ensure that their needs are being met, but also having that open communication when there's a problem and maybe there's a mediation and those kinds of things on behalf of the clients. So yeah, improvement of all the communications across the board for everybody, and being a champion and an advisor for everybody in the system, and making sure everybody is heard. And again, just some things here about what I mentioned earlier. Do we have a current list of open? And I know in each of your offices, I'm sure you have your board, or your spreadsheet, or whatever of what's open. How does that information get out? How do we do that on a regular basis? Do we include it in a weekly newsletter we send out or whatever? And I'm going to venture to say, do we have the top or best performing property managers or property owners or based on, reviews and timeliness of maintenance calls and I don't know what that looks like, but how do we do that? What does that look like? Talking about inspections, really, really, really critically important, especially for those who are on any state or federally funded program. There's a HQS or housing quality standards that have to be met. And I'm going to be very frank, there are sometimes that we've gone into, we could walk in and within 2 minutes know this is not going to pass inspection, and it's going to take a long time to get it to the point to pass inspection. And that's where the case management is
I'm on
critical.
the call.
Okay.
I'm listening to you and Mrs. Collins. Send me an email, all that you just told me, and let me get it documented.
So if we, those kinds of things, and it's an education,
Well, if we have no time, I mean, I don't.
and if we can mute our phones, please, or our computers. But if we,
I mean, I hate to say that, but you know it. I'm not gonna do something.
the inspection process, how do we make that user friendly for everybody? Do we do an ongoing education for all of us? If things change, whatever.
Something they offer.
So standardization and training for everybody on that. I've talked a lot. Anybody want to say anything or have any questions right now before I keep moving? Come on, you guys can't be that quiet. I know. Okay, we're talking about where do we go from here? How do we take an advisory group looking at that
I see.
7 to 10 folks, whether it be again a large property management company, private landlord. How do we put together a group of 7 to 10 folks that can drive this process? Is anybody even interested in pursuing this process? Is this something that you're thinking, you know what, this is not our cup of tea, and that's fine. But we know that what we've done in the past hasn't worked. We have not engaged with those folks, you guys, who can provide housing for our population who is experiencing homelessness. And I'm going to stop sharing for a minute so I can see everybody's faces. We have not done a good job of engaging everybody who can help end homelessness in this community. So how do we do that? What do we do moving forward to make that happen? What does that group of 7 to 10 folks look like? And how do we delegate those responsibilities across the larger group even to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the homeless in our community and thus increasing the quality of life for all of us throughout the community? And someone sent in the chat box, am I going to email this information out? Absolutely. Everybody will get a copy of this sent out today. So I want to open it up, and I just wanted to have some back and forth discussion of what somebody's thoughts are. Is this something that is this something you're willing to participate in? If not, how do we make it something that will not be, we had a meeting, we talked about it, and next year we have another meeting to talk about it again. That's not where we want to take this. We want this to be the beginning of a process that is ever evolving, ever changing, but we're doing it based on goals and how we meet clients and the landlords and our community at large. Everybody is so quiet.
Pat, I'll start. I have a question.
Please.
From the client's perspective, what is the most, like maybe 1 or 2 top critical aspects of finding a house? Is it the availability, like the number of places that they can go, or is it cost, or like, school me on that? What are maybe the top 2 most critical aspects of getting them housed?
Deposit, credit check.
I'm sorry.
Did someone say a deposit?
Yeah.
Okay, well, and that's one of the things that I'm glad you brought that up, because there are ways to get those deposits and all paid. And again, it's all about how we all communicate who is available to do what. And it's part of the planning we're doing in our community for not only COVID funds that are coming in to assist those who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, but also how we do these things in the future. So yes, deposits are a good thing, a critical thing. In fact, Terry from Home for Good may have a little bit more insight than I, Lauren, because she has been the housing stabilization case manager for several years. But I know one thing that we've run across before is if a client goes to look at a place of their own, they have to pay a key deposit, which is normal, and that's normal practice. But if the agency sends a representative with the client, oftentimes there won't have to be that. So again, it's just one thing that an agency acting on behalf or being an advocate for a client can cut down on those barriers. Did you want to add something, Terry?
I agree that deposits could be a problem, but the biggest factor we have is the availability of properties and landlords who are willing to work with us. For example, if I'm working with somebody who has a HUD bash voucher or a move into work voucher, we cannot pay a deposit before there's an inspection. We cannot turn the utilities on in the client's name before there's an inspection or before the lease is signed. We count on the landlords being able to work with us. We've already had one one rental company tell us that they're not going to cooperate with us anymore because they don't want to have to provide, the
I
utilities.
agree they can't deposit until it's inspection.
But those are our biggest problems: finding places in a decent price range
Yes, I
that
looked
are
that program. I
that will
don't know if
pass
you've ever heard
a
of that.
housing community.
I'm sorry, we can't. Terry, hold on one second. I'm sorry. We can't understand you.
Pat, could you ask again that everybody please mute their devices because we keep getting this background information and we're hearing other folks' conversations and can't hear the person we're supposed to be listening to.
Because it's not hard. Not hard.
Okay, if you will, mute your phones again, please, and or your computers, whatever, just so we can hear everybody. And Terry, I'm glad you brought up the different voucher availabilities and those kinds of things, because I'm going to go back to sharing my screen here. I'm not going to pressure anybody. I'm going to reach out to each of you individually to see if someone would like to be part of that, that focus group of the advisory group. But going to the next on my slide presentation here was, in my head, one of the top three things after we get our group together and start divvying up responsibilities is to let's have some education on what are the restrictions and or the requirements for all of the different housing programs. And we all know, just as soon as we get our nice little matrix together and we've got all the requirements and everything else laid out, something's going to change. It happens. Again, but it becomes a living, breathing, working process and document, not something that we put all together, put really nicely on a bookshelf, and then we dust it off once a year. So it'll be something that we can use going forward,
That baby
folks. On
bullshit.
Excuse me, would you please mute your phone? But talking about, that falls into educating the landlords on what's allowable, what's not, what are the different requirements, but also the tenants saying, hey, before there's an inspection done and that requirements have been met, don't sign the lease, because you're going to be liable for that contract. It's a legally binding contract. How do you read a lease? What are the things you need to look for? What are the things that are included in your rent? Is water included? Is it not included? All of those other things. So talking about the tenant education. And then do we have the capability, the need or the want to set up perhaps a mediation process so that we don't have to get to the eviction process? How do we set that up, and who do we work with to do that? And it's always been the dream to have a risk mitigation. If someone says, I'm hesitant about working with this group because I've had bad taste in my mouth. I've had lots of damage and everything else, and how are you going to protect me from that and this, that, and the other? Well, how do we establish a fund so that if there are damages in excess of the deposit, how do we assist landlords with that on an ongoing basis? So I wanted to make sure that everybody saw that. Oops, sorry, hit the little button a little too far. And as I said earlier, the all of the stuff I went over today and more is going to be on these links that are in the presentation today. I'm going to click on one of them just really quickly. So what we just went over within the planning and action is literally just this document right here. And it goes into what it looks like. But then we have a further guide that not only talks about the planning and that stuff, but literally takes us through and gives us links to all kinds of different documents, data. Well, there we go. And it talks about, this one's on the jobless rates. So literally something to hold our hand throughout this process in making sure that we're using, data, we're making data-driven decisions. We're using practices that have been established from, the housing experts at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, talking about benefits of accepting rental assistance. That would be great for us to try and build off of. So again, those are all in the presentation from today. I'm gonna attempt to stop sharing. So how do we move forward, and where do we go from here? Curtis, would you like to say a little things before I start wrapping up?
Well, first of all, on behalf of the COC board, I just want to thank everybody for coming in meeting this morning. We do a lot of work of trying to solve a problem that we think we've done well, and then something happens and it throws us back. But Pat and the whole team, they've been doing a great job of trying to solve these problems. We're trying to figure out different ways to do this, and one of those ways is doing this thing with technology. Excuse me. And to keep this thing going and to engage the people that need to be engaged. And I often, when I get the chance to tell people that I didn't know a whole lot about the homeless situation until I got over. We see a lot in law enforcement, a lot of areas. We see people in houses, but we really get a lot of calls about and actually see people who are homeless. Once I got involved, now I get to see things from a different perspective, and I see it when I go down the street. So, and now being a part of the solution rather than just identifying the problem is been a very pleasant challenge. And I just applaud everybody that wants to get involved. And I know the landlords, there's a double-edged sword for a lot of people. They're making their income rental. Now you've got to not collect the rent. So I just applaud the efforts of everybody, and hope that we can come together and get a good plan and then apply that plan to people that need it the most. Of course, Pat, I'll be glad to be on.
Okay. Well, what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to go down and read the attendance you guys put in the chat box just to make sure that we're not missing anybody. So I've got Sandra from there, Katie from there, Amanda, Kathy Williams, Angelica, Melanie Faison from Neighbor Works, Walisha, Mike Powell sent me, said he was on the call and he was on the phone, so he couldn't type in his name. Who are we missing here? Whose name I did not call out? Richard, I'm sorry, I have you down as well as attending. So what I'll do is I will be emailing this out to all of you and the others that we invited to join the call today with the link to the presentation and the link to all of the documents that I talked about today. And I will be asking for volunteers to step up and to join us on our little advisory group as we move forward. We will move forward with this initiative one way or another because it's absolutely critical that everybody be part of the discussion. And I think, you know, recent events in our country have shown us more and more that, you know, everybody has to be involved in community discussion. You don't ask you don't ask one part of the for one part of the conversation and not the other. It definitely has to be a dialogue and not a monologue. So with that, if anyone has anything to say, I'm gonna leave things open for about 30 seconds. And if anyone has anything, we'll take it from there. If not, we'll go ahead and close out.
Pat, can you hear me?
I can.
One of the things that I wanted to say, in terms of getting more landlord involvement, you know, we've got to look at this thing from different perspectives. Everybody's got an interest, and oftentimes people are interested in what's in it for me. So for landlords, if the more landlords that we have participating, the more information that we can share. And I know that this being continuum of care, we've got to respect certain privacies. But some of us landlords have common issues. We've got people that are gaming the system, and if we had some level of information share, that could help in some respects. But in other respects, I think that what you're attempting to do is awesome, because we need a more representative process.
Yep.
And I say that because it's not just housing. We need to be partnering, and I know Continuum of Care, you do partner with maybe New Horizons and some of those folks, but we've got a tight knit circle because, for example, at my building, the Job House, we've got folks there that have mental issues, and sometimes the mental issues make it difficult for you to house that person
Right.
because they're not getting the support that they need, or not asking for the support that they need. Something's missing in that. I mean, at my building, we've got 60 tenants, and I can't sacrifice 59 for one. So I think greater interagency cooperation and knowing more about what resources are out there, that rather than calling the police on the tenant, I can call a caseworker or another service provider that may be able to help that person to be able to live in their own place.
Mike, you preaching to the choir right now. That's exactly right. Kathy, you look like you were anxious to say something.
No, not anxious. I just need some clarification. So is this the housing advisory group, or is it just the landlords or rental? Or, I mean, I'm a little confused on exactly what this group is being put together for, because I don't, you know, I need to set the expectations for our organization.
Right. Well, what this is literally get the property owners, the landlords. This is engaging the landlords and being part of the larger conversation. That answer your question? Anybody else? Anything else? All right.
I'll say that I would like to be a part of that team.
Yes, sir. That was Mike Powell, right?
Correct.
Yeah, Pat, I think it's also important for the landlords to know that we as case managers are available. We'll give our contact information. Our job is to help the client navigate the system, and we have their permission to act in their stead in a lot of cases. So we will be active with the client throughout the entire process.
And thank you for pointing that out, Terry. And I think, Mr. Powell, you pointed out that, knowing what's available, knowing who to contact and all, but also from a provider perspective, and I'm speaking on behalf of the entire continuum, is ourselves accountable too in providing those services. And that's why we have to have this dialogue. If the expectation is that, Pat Frey will have case management and no one is interceding when there's obvious issues, then that landlord needs to know who to call to get that intervention done. So all of those things are absolutely critical to the success of not only housing someone. Getting somebody the key is really, really easy. Making sure that a year later they still have a key to a home that is safe, affordable, meets their needs, and they have utilities and they have food, and they can not only sustain life, but their life today, a year later, is better than it was a year ago. That's the goal. Because if we continue to do that one person at a time, one household at a time, one family at a time, we will see that improvement in the quality of life throughout our community.
There'll be times, Pat, when we'll have a client with a bad rental history,
Mm-hmm.
just because they didn't have case management. They didn't have
Sure.
someone to help them navigate. And if the landlord can get with us right away and say they missed this month's rent, or they did this kind of damage, we can help them try to solve the problem before it gets out of hand, before they trash the place. Or I don't have clients who've done that, but before they get so far behind in rent that they can't get help, because we know agencies that can help with rent.
Thank you, Harry.
A couple other things I'd like to bring up if I could, Pat.
Sure.
Put my other hat on. What type of an effort and outreach do you have for the faith-based community? Because oftentimes they're the first people to find out that somebody's experiencing homelessness, and they're looking for resources. That's on the one end, and then on the other end, a lot of the philanthropic giving comes from faith-based organizations. So there, I wish there was an effort to educate the faith-based community that here is a simple number that you can call to get some help for that person that's in your office crying and saying they can't feed their kids and they're having to live. That's one. And then two, is there any way to make portability of housing vouchers easier for people across the water? Because I get a lot of calls from people that have vouchers for Columbus, and their perception is it's too difficult to try to get ported to Alabama where there may be some help, and vice versa.
Now that I absolutely do not know the answer to, but you know what? That can be a discussion we have with those who have or have vouchers in or whether it be federal, state, local. So yes, absolutely. Let's. I've got that on my list of absolute discussion topics.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anything before we wrap it up? Well, once again, thank you all for joining us today. I will be sending out the slide presentation with the links to everything, and I will be asking each of you to consider joining us on this endeavor and this process This literally is, we haven't even, this train hasn't even left the station. We are boarding the train to leave the station. And I really hope that you will go on this journey with us and really make an impact on the lives of the most vulnerable in our community. Everyone have a wonderful day and have a great weekend. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.